we're in the exact week that Pfizer mRNA COVID injection was first administered in New Zealand 5 years ago. So it's kind of symbolic and appropriate that we're here filming today. This whole weekend we've been filming in the studio, giving a voice to New Zealanders who have been unable to find a voice anywhere else to share the reality of their experiences taking the Pfizer mRNA.
A lot, yes.
We're here filming more episodes of our docuseries, The Tribute. This is our passion project. It's our determined effort to finally give voice to New Zealanders who have been seriously harmed by the COVID vaccines in New Zealand, in particular the Pfizer mRNA.
A fight for our soul.
We're making with the wonderful Galen Barnes, producer and director, and cinematographer Mark Blackwood from very high-profile work. We're making The River of Freedom, which is kind of also on this subject.
180 souls who have passed away as a result of these forced jabs. We will be erecting crosses that will symbolize the expiration of these beautiful lives.
I hear the angels calling. I hear the angels crying. They say
So that followed the convoy to Parliament, and the reason that thousands of New Zealanders were gathered there, and the primary reason was because they were objecting and pushing back on COVID vaccine mandates. Many New Zealanders were actually forced to take this product, even though it was only provisionally approved. It didn't have a full approval at the time. They were forced through employment mandates, and the media in New Zealand, even 5 years on, is completely silent. Nobody in mainstream media, newspapers, radios, television, is telling these stories. And they're the collateral damage of that unprecedented, massive vaccine rollout. So here we are, we're filming The Tribute. We're going to be filming about another 10 episodes this weekend. Each episode is focused on one New Zealander who has been seriously harmed by the product. This is medically confirmed or government agency confirmed. So these are the legitimate real people walking around or not walking around with serious injury. And why are we doing this? Why do we have to be in a studio filming this ourselves? Why is TVNZ not telling these stories? Why is there not a series in the Herald telling these stories? So for 5 years, one of the things I've been doing is I started a voluntary organisation called the Health Forum NZ 5 years ago, because I realised early on that New Zealanders were not being given the information they made, number one, to make a fully informed consent for this product, and number two, if and when they were injured, they were invisible. They were silenced. Nobody wanted to know. And probably early on you saw quite a few injured people coming out on social media, just filming to their own camera and telling their own stories. And they were met with absolute tsunami of gaslighting, abuse, tons of abuse. That was one of the themes in yesterday's filming, listening to some of the people who were brave enough to go public, with film to camera themselves, and eventually had to just step away from social media because the vitriol and the hatred towards them was so severe. So this is The Tribute. It's a weekly docuseries. Every week a new episode is released. Each episode is about 20-25 minutes long, and it tells the unique story of one New Zealander harmed by a COVID injectable. We also have had no funding for this project, so this is a professional documentary team that we're working with, and we have a Buy Me a Coffee page, and basically we can only keep doing this project, which is it's a passion project, but it's also an ethical project, and it's a historical documentation of what really happened in New Zealand. We can only keep doing this with your help. So if you're able to even just fund us $5 a week with enough people, this is going to give us the ability to tell hundreds of real life stories. So thank you for any help you can share with us. it's interesting that the common themes that come up over and over again are reflective of the common themes that I see on my social media platform. Over and over again, it's the same stories. And those stories are, number one, that they didn't receive a fully informed consent process. They were told over and over again by both their doctor or their pharmacist and the media and the Ministry of Health that this product is, quote, safe and effective. And it was many, many months into the rollout before New Zealanders were even aware of the fact that there was an acknowledged serious adverse event, which of course is heart inflammation or myocarditis. It was months after that was known globally before New Zealand patients were officially informed of that. So, unifying themes, lack of informed consent. Number two, resistance to taking the product. So many of the people in our stories took it because they were terrified into complying through fear of losing their job, through workplace mandates. Another theme is the overwhelming medical gaslighting. So once they were injured and they tried to seek help through their GP, emergency departments, hospitals, etc., they were met with an impenetrable wall of disbelief. No matter what their symptoms were, severe chest pain, breathlessness, palpitations, invariably they were told it couldn't possibly be the vaccine. And in fact, they were told it was anxiety. So the gaslighting is very real, and it's an additional significant layer of trauma that's not generally acknowledged. It's a re-traumatizing of an injured person when they can't get anybody to listen to them or help them. Another common theme that came across really strongly was the battle, again like being re-injured, the battle to receive any kind of support and compensation from the Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund in New Zealand, which is accident compensation. And many of our injured are still fighting, still have not received any compensation or any kind of financial support. So that is a very unifying theme. The other theme that I witness from the thousands of emails that I've received and the comments on my social media is the deeply fractured social cohesion. And, social cohesion is what makes society work. It's people trusting and listening to and supporting other people and being unified on central themes that make society work. And of course, one of those central themes is the belief in the inherent ethics and goodness of the institutions that we follow, so medicine, hospitals, Ministry of Health, the government, the Prime Minister. Belief in all of those models and those institutions are what make society work. And trusting and supporting and believing in each other, within a family, within a workplace, within a local community, that's just as important. So social cohesion. And so what we've seen through the profound propaganda that we were all exposed to with the safe and effective propaganda machine and the absolute refusal for medicine and then for society to believe that people really have been seriously injured, what we've seen is this deep fracturing of social cohesion where the injured people and their families no longer trust any authority. And so that's come through so strongly in every episode that we filmed, the seriously injured people talking about, I will never again take a vaccine, no matter what vaccine. And I no longer trust my doctor or pharmaceutical medicine or the hospital. And then going upwards, people saying, I no longer trust the government. Even when we have a new government, I will no longer trust the government. We have developed a subculture, and I'm not quite sure how sub the culture is and whether it's becoming increasingly a main culture of people that have broken away from the controls and the trust model that makes society work. It's been a really unique, interesting experience looking at the human psychology involved with what we've witnessed in the last 5 years since the rollout of the COVID jabs. Because ordinarily, if somebody is injured by a product, people have been injured by thalidomide or Vioxx or cigarette smoking or whatever, it happens. People talk about it. Now people can talk about their injury from SSRI antidepressants. But talking about a vaccine injury is a whole different level of exposure and risk for the person talking. It's not cool. It's not okay. And you've probably witnessed, I certainly have, people that talk about their injuries are immediately branded as tinfoil hatters, conspiracy theorists, crookers. There's a fairly high-profile independent media platform in New Zealand that loves referring to vaccine-injured people as cookers when they talk about their injury. And I'm the queen of the cookers for advocating for those people. So why is this? Why can't we talk about vaccines? It's because there has been this multi-billion-dollar global concerted effort to hinder, hamper and silence anything that could be construed as vaccine hesitancy. It's the ultimate sin to in any way speak against vaccines, but especially this product, especially COVID vaccines. Science has never settled. Medicine has never settled. It's always an evolving process, and that process involves debate and, differing opinions, but not when it comes to COVID vaccines. Anybody that stands up and speaks out about their own injury, or experts that speak out about what they've witnessed with many people being injured, they're slammed. They lose their livelihood. Here in New Zealand and around the world, we've got many, many doctors who've lost their medical licenses and can no longer practice because they were courageous and they said to patients, we don't have the data to tell you that this is safe during pregnancy. At the beginning, when this was rolled out, we had no data to say that this was safe. And those doctors that had the courage and practiced their code of medical ethics have lost their jobs. They've lost their medical licenses. So this is unprecedented. We haven't seen this before with a medical product. Let's talk a little bit about the data. So we were told at the onset of the rollout that this product, because it was provisionally approved, it was a brand new technology. mRNA had never been used in a publicly rolled out product before. Same for lipid nanoparticles that encase the mRNA. So everything about this product was new, novel, never used before society-wide. And of course, the timeline from the appearance of the novel pathogen, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, to doses of the injection going into arms, billions of arms around the world, 12 months. The ordinary development timeline for a vaccine, at a real pinch, 5 years. Many of them take 12 years from concept to delivery. So everything about this was hyped up, warp speed, unprecedented. And most people did not understand this. The average patient was not aware of this. This wasn't made clear to people. So we were told that Medsafe, which is our pharmacovigilance agency in New Zealand, would be watching this very carefully, monitoring, looking for safety signals. I found it very fascinating that hundreds of millions of dollars went into promoting the product in New Zealand with marketing and, ad agencies and the COVID response. But no money went into any kind of publicly visible marketing campaign to tell people that if they had an adverse event, this is how they reported it. Report it to CALM, this is how you do it. That was silent. Nobody knew about that. So as a result of that, we believe, Medsafe believes, probably only around 5% of the actual adverse events that were experienced by Kiwis were ever reported to Medsafe. So we did an official information application. We got the answer back in the last couple of weeks. And we asked Medsafe what research they have done to determine, what percentage of COVID vaccine injury was actually reported. And they came back to say that they actually don't know the percentage, and they did no surveillance or research or analysis to try to determine the proportion of injuries that were reported. So it might surprise you when I tell you that despite all of that, 68,000 New Zealanders did take the time and find a way of making an adverse event report. And more official government data tells us that to November 2023, more than 20,000 medical events were experienced and reported that were classified as serious. So that's not 20,500 reports, it's 20,500 medical events. And what does serious mean? What's a serious adverse event? There is actually a definition, the Medsafe definition. It's a significant medical injury that entails hospitalization, that produces incapacity, that often is permanent, so permanent injury and death as well. So to the end of November 2023, 20,500 events were reported to Medsafe deemed to fit in that category with an unknown underreporting rate. And it's also really interesting that Medsafe has received 204 reports of death following the Pfizer COVID vaccine in New Zealand. Now, of course, a report of death does not mean that there is absolutely, certainly a causal relationship between the injection and the death. But it's interesting to know that over half of those deaths were reported by doctors, nurses, or vaccinators. So people medically trained or pharmacists, people with some medical background that believed, oh, well, potentially there is a connection here, we need to report this. Just to give you an idea, you're probably thinking, well, 13 million doses of the Pfizer administered in New Zealand, 204 deaths, that's not that many. Just to give you an idea that in a typical year in New Zealand, for all doses of all vaccines administered, all the flu vaccines, the childhood schedule, travel vaccines, shingle vaccines, Gardasil, for all doses administered in a typical year, Medsafe receives less than one death report. So when you're looking at COVID vaccines alone, 204 reports of death, that's extraordinarily overrepresented in terms of the number of deaths reported. And then around the world, when you look at data, of course, Pfizer themselves were actually mandated as part of their permission to sell the product, to use it in different countries. They were mandated to do something called post-marketing safety surveillance. So when a pharmaceutical company produces a product, they have to do the initial clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3, and then jump through all the registration hurdles to get the product on the market. And then once it's on the market, it's known and accepted and acknowledged that a whole new range of adverse events are likely to appear because safety trials are small, they don't involve all cultures, there's often an imbalance between the number of males and females in the trial, and there's a pre-screening or a selection process where people with serious illness, comorbidities, mental health, taking certain other drugs, they're all screened out. So it's a relatively healthy population. So of course, once, for example, in this case, the Pfizer mRNA goes into a real population with all of those people taking the product, we expect to see new, potentially serious adverse events. And that, of course, is exactly what happened. So Pfizer were mandated to do the post-marketing safety surveillance over those first 2 years of product use. Just to give you some idea, in the first 90 days of the rollout globally, in the first 90 days, Pfizer received themselves 45,000 adverse event reports, and more importantly, they received 1,223 death reports, so death following the use of the Pfizer mRNA in the first 90 days. And remember that many people will not have reported the death. They wouldn't have put two and two together. They wouldn't have realised potentially that their loved one taking the product and then dying in their sleep unexpectedly 6 weeks later could in any way be linked to the product. So the 1,223 deaths reported is a vast underreporting of potential deaths. Then when we look at other data around the world, we know that the VigiAccess, which is the World Health Organization pharmacovigilance database, now stands at over 5.5 million adverse event reports. Many of them, seriously, a very high proportion of those adverse events are serious and permanent injury. And then if we look at America, the VAERS Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System database, which is kind of their equivalent of Medsafe here in New Zealand, VAERS acknowledge that they only receive somewhere around 1 to 3% of actual adverse events are ever reported. All of these reporting databases are voluntary. Nobody is mandated. Not even doctors are mandated to report to them. So America right now, they have almost 20,000 post-COVID vaccine deaths reported to their VAERS database. That's across all the different type of COVID vaccines. That's not just Pfizer, it's Moderna and AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson in the early days. But that is completely unprecedented to have a product that is still in use and still being mandated here in New Zealand, still being mandated for certain sections of society, to have that product still here with 20,000 deaths reported in America, 204 in New Zealand, over 1,100 deaths reported in Australia. So there are a lot of very unique, unprecedented features to the pharmacovigilance with this product. It probably surprises you to know that the Pfizer mRNA COVID product is still mandated in some parts of New Zealand. So just to give you an idea, our military, which, a large part of our military are strong, healthy young men, in their teens and 20s, though that demographic, especially men, is acknowledged to be the highest risk demographic for serious heart damage from this product, which is myocarditis, heart muscle inflammation. So they're mandated. We also have basically any of our students at higher level education at techs or unis that are studying health and have to go on health placements, midwives, physiotherapists, nurses, doctors, etc., they're still mandated to take the product. And we still have some independent workplaces, so many employers still saying that the applicants must be COVID vaccinated to apply for the job right now in 2026. So this is madness, especially mandating a product to the very demographic that we know is most at risk of harm, and that's healthy young people. It's a madness in our midst that's not being discussed, or most New Zealanders aren't even aware of it because the media is not looking at the story. And we're talking about it because still there's this blanket of darkness over the land where we're still not allowed to talk about it, and it's too hot a topic for our legacy media to touch. And it's very interesting that one of the subjects we do hear a lot about is this global phenomenon of misinformation and disinformation and conspiratorial thinking and speaking. And it's quite fascinating, isn't it, that, any subject where we're forbidden to shine the light on the subject, we can't lift the carpet and bring all the dust out and really have a good sound analysis of what's going on. Any subject like this and like that, it's a hotbed for conspiratorial thinking. People go off half-cocked without the facts. They make stories up. They, Chinese whispers spread. The biggest way, the most effective way that the government could diminish and disarm conspiratorial thinking is to give us the data. One of the high points for my work and the work of the Health Forum in 2025, of course, was the second phase of the New Zealand Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID response. So we had a first phase under the Labour government, and it was deemed that the terms of reference were far too narrow. I wholeheartedly agree. And so then the new government lobbied for and achieved a second phase of the Royal Commission. And the second phase, the terms of reference were expanded. So for the first time, we were able to actually talk about everything to do with the vaccine, the procurement, the mandates, medical exemptions, the safety and the efficacy of the product. And so that came right into our wheelhouse at the Health Forum. And we prepared an absolutely enormous submission. In total, it was somewhere around 1,000 pages in many different sections, which we submitted to the Royal Commission of Inquiry with a request that we could appear in person before them. And we did, in fact, do that. So we had a closed-door meeting for about 90 minutes with the 3 commissioners and the senior executive, myself, and we had 1 bereaved family and 9 very seriously injured New Zealanders. And so we were there specifically to talk about the reality of COVID vaccine injury in New Zealand. And then I was lucky enough to be chosen as one of the speakers or the organisations to present a live testimony in front of the Royal Commission. I had half an hour. I could have talked for 15 and a half hours without drawing breath, but I had to get a lot into half an hour. And overall, I was really pleased with the points that we did manage to get across that day. Potentially, the Royal Commission of Inquiry has an unprecedented opportunity to really bring light and truth and fact and data to the reality of serious harm and death from this provisionally approved product. And I'm very hopeful that the commissioners that were chosen had the autonomy, the independence, and the integrity to do just such a job.
Commissioners, good morning again. We're now going to be joined by Lynda Wharton, the founder of the Health Forum NZ. I'll start by asking you to introduce yourself to the commissioners.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity of being here today. I really appreciate it.